You know, if I was a John Carpenter's The Thing conspiracy theorist, I might have just wondered if Bennings is suddenly no longer himself anymore. Call me paranoid. It is widely accepted these days among, well, pretty much everybody actually, that John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982 is one of the most highly revered horror films ever constructed. It simply delights in getting under your skin in so many more ways than one, and leaves you guessing from start to finish. From its masterclass showcasing of devilishly good practical effects that make even the modestly squeamish go reaching for the bucket, all the way to the very poignant and traumatising sensations of paranoia that follow these characters right to the last man standing, if by that point they are still men, that is. The Thing is a priceless piece of well-written, well-crafted and well-executed cinematic excellence that frankly feels timeless, especially in today's climate of storytelling and predictable silliness. I don't know what it says about me, but when I'm feeling a wee bit low or I'm just simply sick of modern horror movies having minimal impact on me, I'll always sit back, relax and hit play on this absolute cracker as I experience the next 2 hours pass me by in a flash. It's tricky to put my finger on exactly why this movie is such an incredible joy to watch time and time again, as there are many moving parts to this well-oiled machine. But for now, let's talk about the kennel scene, shall we? What works so well about how this segment begins is mostly owed to the silence that is present, which dominates and controls our anticipation as the build-up to a most horrifying outcome begins. A director who knows when and how to use music in a horror or thriller is of key importance in these particular genres, demonstrated perfectly here with the complete absence of any soundtrack. All we can hear is the muffled ambience of the bleak and icy wind outside, howling, subtly letting its residents know how fragile and fleeting their lives are in comparison to the harsh and constant elements that surround the station. What complements this moment so wonderfully is the outstanding performance from Jed the Alaskan Malamute. You hear about Oscar snubs all the time, but I'm deadly serious when I say that our little animal friend here should have been at least nominated for Best Supporting Actor that year. Any director who has worked with animals will describe the difficulties on a set when trying to have them do what is needed for the scene, but in this case the acting was surprisingly flawless. Both John Carpenter and Kurt Russell have spoken many times about how very few takes were needed to film these moments, as well as the dog's innate ability to make the human actors feel uneasy on set because of his slow, methodic and creepy manner. Apart from the fact that Jed never even acknowledges the cameraman in these shots, which must have felt like they were capturing lightning in a bottle, with something so unique and special. For me, it's the way the dog pauses and closes its mouth, almost in deep contemplation before moving inside the pen that frightens me so much. You get the feeling it is analysing its environment in ways we couldn't even comprehend, whatever this thing truly is. The other dogs begin to whimper ever so slightly as some instinctive caution sets in. They must know something is wrong, even though the newly introduced canine has been mimicked so well, right down to its scent, I would imagine. The only giveaway that this mutt is not what it seems, albeit subtle, is the unnerving behaviour in which it vacantly fixates on the empty wall in front. Every cell in this flawless imitation must be waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike, whilst no doubt trying to hold back an insatiable hunger to devour the 6 unassuming victims that surround it. As the light goes out and every living creature in the cage remains completely still, we see what may be one of the most foreboding images in the whole film, even if we only glimpse it for a fraction of a second. It's also virtually impossible to differentiate the phony dog from Jed in some of these shots, as the lighting allows us to see just enough of what we need to and no more. The sense of impending doom for these poor little guys is quite unbearable and feels all the more tragic that they are now locked up with this unknown threat and have nowhere to run. Just before the situation dials up to 11 in what may be one of cinema's most explosively shocking and grotesque horror sequences ever, Clark, right before leaving, stops to look back at the new family member with a shred of hesitation and uncertainty in his eyes. This fleeting glance is just enough to make the tension and suspense increasingly more palpable for the audience, creating a real sense of terror and trepidation for things to come. I do love how this scene relentlessly continues in its pursuit of escalating anxiety without switching to simultaneous events in the common room with the other residents. It locks us in for the ride with almost pure indifference to our feelings as we begin to witness the full capabilities and survival mechanisms of this alien entity in a most profound and astonishing way. The newly introduced canine, as we are about to find out, well, he doesn't like to play nice, and suddenly the whole atmosphere in the kennel rapidly shifts as we begin to hear the creature start to produce these disturbingly long and deliberate breathing sounds that probably just start as a low-level annoyance for our friend here. We've all been there. Hearing someone else snore is enough to irritate the best of us and keep one awake at night. But with what is about to happen, I can only assume that this minor grievance for our nameless buddy quickly escalates to thoughts of, I did not sign up for this shit. The transformation from blending in and concealment to extreme hostility happens instantly as we now become privy to a horrifyingly intimate ritual this creature has more than likely performed countless times over millennia, and in the process has no doubt catalogued the DNA from numerous life forms across an ocean of stars. Not that any of this matters to these poor fellows, as all they can do in the face of such overwhelming aggression and torture is howl for help and agonisingly bite their way through the metal cage wire to safety. Once again, it cannot be overstated how remarkable all of the performances are from these dogs, as they demonstrate genuine primal reactions of fear in response to such a ferocious and unstoppable adversary. With the limitations of what could be done at the time with practical special effects, they were still able to achieve such a phenomenal level of authenticity in every piece and component, both liquid and solid, that we see on display. The over-the-top tearing of flesh revealing parts of diverse but unnatural-looking anatomy and protruding limbs that seem to belong to some foreign arachnid style of biology should normally not work as well as it does in this film. However, not once in any part of the creature effects and transformation sequences in The Thing did I ever feel my suspension of disbelief had wavered. Even when I watch it today, I feel a great sense of reverence and awe as I stare wide-eyed and teeth clenched in total disbelief at the spectacular practical effects that are achieved so well. These methods were so innovative and masterfully produced to stand the test of time that they may just exceed the brilliance, cleverness and genius of the script itself. And that's saying something, as The Thing is also best known for its firm grip and superiority of injecting high levels of mystery and paranoia into an already frightening setting with fantastically realistic and interesting characters properly fleshed out. For many of the slimy discharge and liquid jet effects, we see them being applied on both real and phony dogs for different applications. The main ingredient used to produce the desired consistency was actually something called carbapor, which is used in the creation of Twinkies, believe it or not. Don't worry though, as the Humane Society was present on set for the animals' welfare, I'm sure they had a wonderful first-hand experience witnessing some of these graphic effects come to life. Another important component to mention that goes hand in hand with the creation of these practical effects, which ultimately gave them a lifelike quality and fantastic sense of realism, is the expert use of reverse motion filming. To take this shot as an example, all these menacing looking tentacles that are frantically whizzing around trying to sense their surroundings were achieved by operating small whips from inside the phony dog prop. The fast movement of the whips as well as the reverse footage certainly makes for some disturbing visuals, to say the least. Poor old Clark, can't catch a beat, this guy. Of all the people I feel sorry for in this film, it's probably Clark in this scene that I sympathise with the most. Losing man's best friend in this way, and more than one of them, is tough going. As he makes his way back down the shadowy corridor once more, we gradually hear the music fade in. Much like what I spoke about before with the importance of timing and allowing a scene to breathe when it comes to the soundtracks in horror, now is the perfect example of matching what we hear with what we see, and doing it in a way that doesn't force you to feel anything other than the direction and momentum this scene has been leading us to. The music is threatening, eerie and ominous, which in turn elevates the tension felt during this slow and uneasy walk through the dimly lit corridor back to the kennel door. Why exactly the light won't turn on at this point is a mystery to me, but I do wonder if the thing had observed and recognised its function upon entering, therefore disabling it during the process of trying to imitate the dogs. This would allow it to better conceal itself while in a state of vulnerability to external threats. The feeling of dread that washes over me as Clark peers into the void of darkness for just those few seconds is intoxicating. It's that familiar sensation of when swimming in the sea if the water is murky and not knowing what lies beneath. That feeling of being dangerously on the edge of something as so close to the unknown is an odd emotion. And that's how you do a jump scare, ladies and gentlemen. Here he is, the man, the myth, the legend, MacReady, played by the one and only Kurt Russell, of course. He is perhaps the most relatable character in this story, as he never starts as the hero, and his qualities are not obvious to see. We get the impression he doesn't particularly want to be at this installation by the amount he drinks, as well as his cold manners towards the rest of the group. However, in the process of just reacting to the oncoming chaos, he naturally takes leadership and, I think, becomes the moral compass of the film, as we watch him make the most sensible and logical choices even when it would appear there is no hope left. As the whole group of panicked and confused researchers now gather in the dark and confined corridor, we can hear that the transformation inside the pen has escalated by the evidence of absolutely horrific audible groans and deformed howls, which send shivers down the spines of the shocked crew. As the situation intensifies, I don't even care to ask why they have so much firepower with them. I can understand the flamethrower would be a great utility tool in Antarctica when surrounded by ice and snow, but the array of small and medium-sized guns seems a tad overkill for a continent that doesn't have any predators that would concern them. Notice just how quickly the cellular activity takes effect. The biochemical and metabolic transformation as it consumes its victims and then tries to replicate them would almost be complete had it been given slightly more time. As horrifically paralysing as this metamorphosis is to watch for the team stationed here, what truly summarises the entity's most formidable attributes is its ability to be any one of us at any time without knowing. There is also a powerful sense of mystery to the alien as it is essentially faceless. There is no heart or soul of the creature hidden away inside somewhere, as there is nothing original about it. Was there ever? It's almost like the animal version of the fungus named Ophiocordyceps that takes control of insects, therefore just existing to assume the physicality and intelligence of any host it meets. It's pretty chilling to imagine such a threat, but this is why the Thing remains one of the most talked about and most thought about monsters/aliens in any creature feature horror that exists. I mean, its genius is right up there with the xenomorph, isn't it? As the assault on this Thing takes place and we see just how fast the complexity of cellular mimicry happens, it is also a stark reminder that it most likely would have created a double for each of the dogs in the pen if it hadn't been disturbed. If this was allowed to happen, then it would have been a short film indeed, and no doubt would have required the obligatory sequel as well. I suppose we did get a prequel, but I'm still trying to forget about that one. As MacReady and Gary kindly put the remaining dogs out of their misery, I seem to be reminded once more of that fine line in storytelling and how badly it can go wrong when using an obscene amount of special effects like this. I can't tell you how many films I've watched that were also limited to practical effects, or even modern pictures that boast a return to form with practical as opposed to CGI, that just left me feeling nothing. Without a script like this one, with all the clever details, finesse of plot points and characters that John Carpenter was able to fully flesh out, it could easily just have fallen apart and simply been another tasteless and empty horror flick that just showed us gore for the sake of, well, showing gore. These incredibly repulsive and scary shots of the two powerful claws pushing through the ceiling panel like it was nothing, as well as the huge blob of muscle and tissue which seems to be in the process of forming a multitude of eyes, casually watching the humans. These frightening images must have inspired so many films and computer games that came afterwards. Carpenter and his crew were so bold with their designs back then, and the amount they showed, but thankfully it all works. It all feels believable and excitingly immersive, as we greatly fear the thing, and we most certainly sense the threat to the team that we already are fully invested in. The time to get to know everyone up until this point has been fairly limited, but the actors play their parts so well and appear like they've been living on this outpost for quite a lengthy duration that it engages us to want to learn more about them and provides a great desire to see what happens next. This lifeform doesn't appear to have too many weaknesses. We know it can survive frozen in ice, and most likely it would probably have the same effect in the vacuum of space as well. I'd also predict it would thrive if it ever got into the sea. This is an outcome spelling doom for planet Earth. I'm sure most would agree on that. However, fire seems to stop it in its tracks one way or another. The film doesn't fully explore if fire is a kill switch for the thing or whether it only momentarily cripples the lifeform, as we see aspects of both outcomes. Either way, what baffles me more than anything is why they didn't burn the damn thing just a little bit longer, if only to be sure. I understand the risk of the structural integrity of the station that exists so far away from any help, yet the chance of it spreading and igniting to the rest of the building would seem unlikely due to fireproof components and given the temperature outside. Perhaps it was a natural inclination for them to rush in and desperately put out the flames so they could study the creature, as they were scientists after all. This might provide some reasoning for yet another odd decision made by the team. Break a leg there, yummy. To me, this organism still looks to be very much alive, so whether Blair is feeling particularly brave at the moment, or possibly the thought of a finder's fee lingers in his mind, who knows. I have to assume the boys are in deep shock and simply wish to know what they are dealing with. From the autopsy, it is pretty evident that the imitation process was likely to produce multiple dogs. I can only assume one copy of every dog that was present in the cage. This does beg the question, why not simply create numerous clones of the subjects and then overrun the remaining humans? I can understand that while trying to infiltrate a large group of potential hosts, this may not be the best tactic, as stealth and deception will be its best strategy for survival. However, when backed into a corner or outnumbered, it would surely have to adopt a much less passive form of attack, much like what we see at the end of the film. Then again, I suppose if we were to just look at the situation in terms of energy and mass, the transformation process understandably takes time, albeit an incredibly short amount of time, but during this digestion period, the thing is at its most vulnerable. If vulnerable is even the right word to use, probably better to say it's in its weakest state and more susceptible to attacks that could both finish off its current form with all the biological data and DNA collected thus far, as well as the destruction of its new host. Some further reasoning as to why this thing cannot simply just multiply and overwhelm its enemy with numbers is because it can only use its own as well as its victims' collected energy and mass to replicate. And in doing so, it appears to completely transform and imitate it right down to the cellular level. So of course it cannot produce more of itself if the organic matter is not there in the first place. I feel like it's way too easy to get lost in a rabbit hole regarding the biology of this alien creature and how it can exist, but at least to me it's an interesting afterthought that if we apply the same scientific principles, then what happens when it imitates a smaller creature? Where does all the excess matter go? Had it been revived in a location where rats were present, then perhaps it would have spawned a small army of imitated rodents to spread itself more efficiently. Every time we see the thing in action, it showcases defensive and offensive capabilities demonstrated in a multitude of varying ways. And I think it's safe to say that for every uniquely disturbing and grotesque form displayed when the thing attacks or tries to retreat, we are actually witnessing a database coded away inside its very being of all the alien life it has obliterated during its existence. Fascinating, really. Personally, I think one of the more noteworthy studios should make a series on this, exploring a continuation of its presence on Earth, as well as the findings inside the derelict spacecraft, detailing where it has possibly been before its crash landing here during the last ice age. Well, that concludes this chapter of John Carpenter's The Thing from 1982. Many would argue that this chapter is really where the film begins, as we are now introduced to the paranoia that gives this movie one of the best reasons to rewatch time and time again. Hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I look forward to exploring more of the film soon. Take care as you go, and remember to please stay entertained.